Welcome back, one and all, to Eye of the Beholder, where we review Dungeons & Dragons miniatures produced by WOTC and WizKids for the 20-year span covering 2003 through 2023. If you've been paying attention, we've been working our way through the Undead minis in honor of Halloween. We'll be continuing that with a single type of Undead in this video, the skeleton. Skeletons are the easiest of the Undead to create, and as such, are the most common. Many low-level parties cut their teeth fighting waves of these raised in an abandoned church or shadowy graveyard. Held together by necrotic energy, while they can fight hand-to-hand, they are often armed with a variety of weapons. Couple of production notes. First off, as there is only so many ways I can say monochrome white with a dark wash for detailing, take it as a given during my reviews. Secondly, between WOTC and WizKids, there are 48 different skeleton minis released between 2003 and 2023, so we'll be changing things around a bit. I'm sure you'll figure it out as we go. We got our first two skeleton minis in the inaugural Harbinger set of 2003. The first, a simple skeleton, would be a daunting task for a low-level PCs, as he is well armored. I particularly like the wide-brimmed helmet with chains hanging from the brim, and the shin guard protecting the lead leg. Shield and sword complete the look. Our second is a wolf skeleton mini. The coolest thing about this mini is the metal collar with trailing chain on its neck, indicating that it broke away from its bonds. Interesting detail, the collar is not part of the sculpt, it was added and is loose about the neck. Scores: skeleton, paint 13, pose 15, playability 15, pizzazz 14, for a score of 57. Wolf skeleton, paint 11, pose 12, playability 12, pizzazz 13, for a score of 48. (2004) gives us three skeleton minis. The warrior skeleton from Archfiends, the minotaur skeleton from Giants of Legend, and the gnoll skeleton for Aberrations. The warrior skeleton may not look it, but they are created from the bones of great warriors and retain their original fighting skills, much to the final surprise of many foes. The mini doesn't look all that. Basic battle pose that took a bit of the old hot-cold treatment to straighten. We get our first large skeleton with this minotaur skeleton. Nice touch leaving the hooves brown on the otherwise white body. Posed advancing forward with its traditional two-handed axe, it's another solid early mini. The gnoll skeleton mini is posed in profile, large shield held forward with axe ready to counterstrike. Another well-armored mini that would add great flavor to any large skeleton battle. Scores: warrior skeleton, paint 12, pose 14, playability 13, pizzazz 12, for a score of 51. Minotaur skeleton, paint 14, pose 17, playability 15, pizzazz 16, for a score of 62. And the gnoll skeleton, paint 13, pose 16, playability 14, pizzazz 14, for a score of 57. We get a bumper crop of skeletons in 2005. Death Knell gives us the skeletal dwarf and burning skeleton, Angelfire gives us a skeletal archer, and the Underdog gives us a skeletal equisif and orc skeleton. The skeletal dwarf has a well-armored head and torso above bare legs. Armed with the usual axe shield combo, I'd use this in my first wave in a full-on skeleton attack. Burning skeletons are exactly as advertised, engulfed in ever-burning flames. Before the days of translucent plastic, we got bright orange flames absolutely engulfing the skeleton, particularly its back. Send it in with the dwarves. Our skeletal brigade is coming together with a skeletal archer, as every army needs ranged attacks. Also note the scabbarded sword on its hip. This archer would not be helpless should enemies close to melee range. What's an equisif? Think Minotaur, but as a horse. And while we never get an equisif mini, we do get a skeletal one. The plate armor is nicely detailed. Pose has it advancing forward with a truly brutal-looking pole arm raised in preparation of battle. Our final mini is the orc skeleton. Bigger and broader than a human skeleton, it is armed with what looks like a cutlass. I send these in on the second wave behind the dwarves and burning skeletons. Scores. Skeletal Dwarf, Paint 13, Pose 14, Playability 13, Pizzazz 12, for a score of 52. Burning Skeleton, Paint 16, Pose 11, Playability 12, Pizzazz 14, for a score of 53. Skeletal Archer, Paint 12, Pose 16, Playability 20, Pizzazz 13, for a score of 61. Skeletal Equisif, Paint 15, Pose 18, Playability 13, Pizzazz 15, for a score of 61. Orc Skeleton, Paint 15, Pose 16, Playability 18, Pizzazz 15, for a score of 64. We get 2 true skeletons in 2006, plus a variant. From War Drums, we get the Flame Skull and Skeletal Legionnaire, and from Blood War, the Skeletal Reaper. Flames are fashioned from the skulls of dead spellcasters, and yes, I know it's a stretch to include them as skeletons, but just go with it. Back when WOTC was trying to make tiny minis a thing, its small size really makes detailing hard to see. Fortunately, we get a better one later on. The Skeletal Legionnaire is pretty cool, standing guard in the remnants of its armor, round shield in hand, and spare haft in the ground, on guard. The Skeletal Reaper has an amazing look to it. The purple robes swirl around the body as if whipped in a ferocious wind. Armed with a scythe, note the incredible detailing on the weapon. You can see the bolts where the blade is attached to the wooden handle, and the blade itself shows wear with scratches and notches on the business end. Scores. Flame Skull, Paint 7, Pose 10, Playability 6, Pizzazz 5, for a score of 28. Skeletal Legionnaire, Paint 12, Pose 13, Playability 16, Pizzazz 12, for a score of 53. Skeletal Reaper, Paint 21, Pose 23, Playability 20, Pizzazz 24, for a score of 88. "2007 gives us 3 more skeletons. From the Unhallowed set, we get the Bone Naga. Generally created by Dark Nagas, they retain most of their spellcasting ability as well as venomous fangs. This is a very solid mini. I particularly like the skull with wide open mouth displaying its fangs. From the Night Below set, we get this very cool mounted skeleton called a Skeletal Courser. Armed with shield and lance aboard a skeletal horse, the pose suggests that we caught it pre-charge, left hoof raised, pawing the ground in preparation. Another plus, while pretty impressive looking, it's still a skeleton, so fairly killable. Throw one in for your low-level PCs to feel powerful. Finally, from the Desert of Desolation set, we get this Bone Shard skeleton. Other than the red-brown of the bones, this mini does not really match the description of the creature. There should be a cloud of purple necrotic energy within the rib cage. But it's our only option, so use it if you must. Scores. Bone Naga, Paint 16, Pose 20, Playability 18, Pizzazz 20, for a score of 74. Skeletal Courser, Paint 17, Pose 18, Playability 20, Pizzazz 18, for a score of 73. Bone Shard Skeleton, Paint 11, Pose 13, Playability 10, Pizzazz 10, for a score of 44. "2008 brings us 2 variants, both pretty cool. From the Dungeons of Dread set, we get the Skeletal Tomb Guardian. Name explains function, and with the 2 extra arms grafted to its body, it functions quite well. Leaning forward, eye sockets focus, and all 4 swords at the ready, what a great surprise to spring on any wannabe Lara Crofts. WOTC takes another swing at the blazing skeleton with this mini from the Against the Giants set, and while it may not be a home run, it's definitely extra bases. The blackened skeletal body is completely surrounded by necrotic purple flames, with the added bonus of the translucent orange fireball he holds in both hands ready to fling at the PCs. Scores: Tomb Guardian, Paint 17, Pose 20, Playability 15, Pizzazz 25 for a score of 77. Blazing Skeleton, Paint 23, Pose 25, Playability 18, Pizzazz 25 for a score of 91. 2009 gives us two non-human skeletons, both from the Monster Manual Savage Encounters set. The first is a skeletal cyclops. Great detailing on the body, particularly the cyclopean skull with a single eye socket. Unarmed other than studded bracers, he moves inexorably toward his foe. Nice touch on the pelt on the back. The next is the skeletal tiefling. Fully armored with only its toes, tail, and horn skull exposed, it carries a wicked-looking barbed sword in its left hand. Add these to your skeletal horde for a bit of flavor. Scores: Skeletal Cyclops, Paint 17, Pose 14, Playability 15, Pizzazz 18 for a score of 64. Skeletal Tiefling, Paint 13, Pose 12, Playability 14, Pizzazz 14 for a score of 53. "2010 marks WOTC's swan song from D&D Miniatures, and we go out with this single skeleton mini from the Lords of Madness set. Well armored and armed, with chainmail and longsword, with some pretty nice detailing on the large shield. I also like the look of the skull, mouth slightly parted in what appears to be a maniacal grin. And it's a common to boot, so easy to get. Score: Paint 14, Pose 15, Playability 17, Pizzazz 15 for a score of 61. It takes WizKids 4 sets and 6 years before we get our first skeleton in 2016's Monster Menagerie set. Was it worth the wait? Well, you be the judge. Clad in tattered brown armor, silver shoulder pads and helmets, with black boots and gloves to complete the look, he appears to be shambling toward an enemy, sword held away from the body in ready position. It's nice. Not thrilling, but nice. Score: Paint 14, Pose 13, Playability 14, Pizzazz 14 for a score of 55. In 2017's Tomb of Annihilation, we get 2 variants of skeleton minis spread across 5 miniatures. One variant is necessary, the other one not so much. The necessary variants are the skeleton keys. I see what you did there, WizKids. All 3 wear leather kilts and shoulder armor, all 3 wield twin daggers, and all 3 wear tall helmets. No spoilers, but all 3 wear tall helmets. The unnecessary variant are the 2 skeleton minis, basically the same except for the same as the skeleton keys, but are bareheaded. Skulled? Anyway, one has the twin daggers while the other carries a plain round shield. I guess you can never have too many skeleton minis, but still don't think we needed 2 of these. Score: Skeleton keys. Paint 13, Pose 12, Playability 17, Pizzazz 12, for a score of 54. Skeletons: Paint 13, Pose 12, Playability 13, Pizzazz 11, for a score of 49. "2019's brings us 2 Minotaur skeleton variants, plus another flame skull. The Minotaur skeletons comes from the Waterdeep Dungeons of the Mad Mage set, and boy does WizKids love its variants. WotC did a Minotaur skeleton as well, but these are both larger and posed much more aggressively, leaning in towards their foes. One wields a 2-handed axe, the other a 2-handed maul, otherwise same. From the Baldar's Gate Descent into Avernus set, we get this cute little guy. Meet Barnabas the Flame Skull. Mounted high on a clear plastic stand, the little ball of translucent green flames has a hint of a face if you look closely enough. Slightly better than the WotC version, but only slightly. Scores: Minotaur Skeletons, Pose 14, Paint 14, Pose 19, Playability 15, Pizzazz 18, for a score of 66. Barnabas the Flame Skull, Paint 11, Pose 13, Playability 12, Pizzazz 12, for a score of 48. (2020's) Eberron Rising from the Last War set gives us two versions of the Carnathy skeleton. A common version with twin scimitars and an uncommon with twin axes. Armor and attire are identical. Cool detailing on the fur-lined boots. Do skeleton tootsies get cold? The Carnathy Undead are stronger than your standard Undead, and these two minis actually look the part. Score: Paint 15, Pose 17, Playability 14, Pizzazz 15, for a score of 61. Later in 2020, we get this awesome looking Frost Giant skeleton in the Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden set. The detailing on this mini is fantastic. The ribcage peeking out of the tattered tunic, the wispy remains of the beard on the skull, even a peak of ankle bone from a rend in the right boot. Posed as a left-handed power hitter waiting in the batter's box, ready to take a mighty swing with his axe. Here's the cool part. This is obviously a dead version of the Frost Giant from the same set. Score: Paint 25, Pose 21, Playability 16, Pizzazz 23, for a score of 85. We get two pretty cool skeletons in the Fangs and Talons set that closes out 2020. The first is this skeletal alchemist. Obviously created to assist a master alchemist in his laboratory, this skeleton is quite dapper in its black robes and wizard hat. Nice runic detailing on the robe, by the way. Holding a translucent potion bottle, note the cork stopper. I'd use it in an abandoned lab slumped over its workbench only to rise and attack the PCs. Score: Paint 18, Pose 13, Playability 11, Pizzazz 20, for a score of 62. From the same set, we get this Fire Giant skeleton. Not quite as cool as the previous Frost Giant one, but again, we get some great detail work here. This particular Undead has seen some battle. Note the great rends in the armor exposing ribs and the great broken sword. Doesn't seem to deter it much. The pose has it advancing on an enemy, and I'm quite sure that broken sword is still deadly. Score: Paint 20, Pose 22, Playability 16, Pizzazz 20, for a score of 78. As you can imagine, if you name a set Boneyard, you're going to get a lot of skeletons. And that is exactly what we get in this 2021 set, 7 to be exact. The first 3 are your garden variety skeletons, a human with a bow, a gnome skeleton with a hand axe, and a dwarf skeleton with a bigger axe. All 3 have cool little touches: the yellow fletching of the human skeleton's arrows, the malevolence in the skull of the gnome, and the dwarf just seems pissed at someone. Not enough difference to warrant individual scores though, so Paint 13, Pose 12, Playability 15, Pizzazz 12, for a score of 52. Now it's getting interesting. This avatar of death is, well, death personified. WizKids looked at WOTC's Skeletal Reaper mini and said, nice, but check this out. Captured in mid-flight on a sturdy translucent stand, its robes flapping in the wind as it sweeps upon its target, right arm outstretched while holding a translucent blue scythe in its left. And did you notice the hourglass at the hip, attached by a chain crossing its torso like a bandolier? It's so cool. Paint 24, Pose 25, Playability 20, Pizzazz 24, for a score of 94. We also get this warhorse skeleton. It is well painted and nicely detailed, sporting full tack while rising up on its hind legs to kick with its forelegs. I also like how the skull is covered with a full-face brass helmet. My only issue is, there is no rider. By this time, WizKids had gotten adept at adding riders to mounts like this one. Not having one really kills the playability of the Mini. Score: Paint 18, Pose 20, Playability 9, Pizzazz 15, for a score of 62. We also get our second Bone Naga, first for WizKids. It's alright, I suppose. Curled in upon itself, very low to the ground and fangs displayed, the pose to me is similar to a rattlesnake about to strike. Also, while I'm sure that the spikes running down each side of the creature are undoubtedly deadly, to me it makes it look like a skeletal centipede. All in all, I prefer the WOTC version. Score: Paint 13, Pose 15, Playability 18, Pizzazz 14, for a score of 60. Our final skeleton from the Boneyard set is this Hill Giant skeleton. Other than a very tattered loincloth hanging from its hips, this is as monochrome as it gets. We do get a great expression on its face, full of hate of all living things. Unlike our Frost Giant skeleton, this one bats righty. Miguel Cabrera to the Frost Gelatin Shohei Ohtani, if you will. Score: Paint 14, Pose 18, Playability 15, Pizzazz 16, for a score of 63. Our next two minis are from 2021 Snowbound and 2022's Van Richten Guide to Ravenloft sets, respectively. The first, called a Skeletal Sentinel, this Snowbound mini is definitely giving off White Walker vibes. Finish the effing books, George. He's even carrying what looks like a climbing hook. What I'm not getting is Sentinel vibes. He looks more like he's trudging a car across the tundra. The Van Richten's mini, called a Skeletal Archer, is actually one of the more colorful skeletons we get, with blue leggings, loincloth, and short cape trimmed in yellow. The pose is pretty dynamic, tilting to one side as he aims down the shaft of the nocked arrow. Scores: Skeletal Sentinel, Paint 14, Pose 13, Playability 15, Pizzazz 13, for a score of 55. Skeletal Archer, Paint 17, Pose 17, Playability 18, Pizzazz 18, for a score of 70. We finish up our run of skeletal bad boys with these four from 2023's Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen set. First up is this common skeleton. Clad in brown armor and carrying a two-handed axe, this mini will certainly log playmat time. Next up is this badass skeletal knight. Clad in full plate torso armor over a scale mail skirt, the only exposed bones are the hands, skull, and incongruously, the right knee. I can't tell if the horns on the helmet are decorative or part of the skull, which would make this a tiefling skeleton. Black longsword held wide of the body complete the look. What's more badass than a skeletal knight, you ask? Well, that would be this skeletal Knight Rider, of course. Same armor as our previous mini, with just the addition of the midnight blue cloak flowing from his back. Interestingly, the mount is an actual living warhorse, captured in full gallop, tail trailing behind. The galloping effect is enhanced by the translucent stand, as it allows the mini to be posed with all four hooves off the ground. Our final miniature is a named NPC, Worston Kern, yet another undead in the service of Lord Soth. Obviously far more than your average skeleton. I'm not even sure if I'm classifying him correctly, as I couldn't find anything online that actually says what type of undead he is, so I went with skeleton. Captured waving a banner to rally the troops, necrotic purple hair trailing behind him. Note the banner. Close examination reveals the sigil of the Knights of Solamnia. Scores: Skeleton, Paint 13, Pose 13, Playability 16, Pizzazz 13 for a score of 55. Skeletal Knight. Paint 12, Pose 15, Playability 15, Pizzazz 17 for a score of 59. Skeletal Knight Rider. Paint 16, Pose 25, Playability 15, Pizzazz 22 for a score of 78. And Worston Kern, Paint 18, Pose 16, Playability 10, Pizzazz 17 for a score of 61. And that's it. Another video done. Our next video will be another quickie as we look at Skull Lords, Spectres, and a rando or two before we tackle the next big batch of minis, Vampires. Thanks again for watching Eye of the Beholder. Leave a like or comment if you please.